Hey, we're going to be looking at dictionaries on this webinar. We're going to be talking about the syntax. We're going to look at the difference between dictionaries and uh, lists, and we're going to try to do something with dictionaries, which is a bit real life task, like counting items. Okay, so if we start with our list syntax, we're going to see that we can write it by giving it a name. In this case, it's going to be this list, and we use the square brackets. And inside of the square brackets, separated by commas, are different objects. In this case, it's going to be 4 different strings. But let's try to visualize this a little bit by putting it in a diagram. And let's pretend that each one of these objects is part of a section of this list. And each section of this list is given an index starting at 0. So if we wanted to be able to access things in this list, we would use that index, we would use the name of the list, and we'll be able to get a value out. In this case, we have the name this list, and we have the indexed 1, which will give us the object or the string CIS. And we'd be able to print that out, which would give us the printout CIS. Next, let's look at the difference between lists and dictionaries. So let's start with the syntax first. You'll notice that lists have square brackets. However, when we're going to declare or initialize a dictionary, we're going to use curly brackets. And in this case, we're going to give it a different name. We're going to call it my dictionary. And inside, we're going to give it 4 values, each one separated by a comma. And you're going to notice that each one of those values is also separated by a colon. On the left side, you're going to have an object, and on the right side, you're going to have another object. The left object is called a key, and the right object is called a value. So whenever we want to refer to each one of those sides, we will use these terms. However, we should try to sort of visualize this and give it an internal structure just like we saw with lists. If we look at the internal structure, we have these pairs, these key value pairs inside. And let's look at our first pair. On the left side, we have a key called class, which is a string, and on the right side, we have a string called CS, which is another string. We move on to the next set of pairs, and we'll notice that internally, they will be sort of attached to each other, just like the first one. And we move on through the dictionary, and we'd end up with a structure like this one. Let's go ahead and try to get some values out of this dictionary, and let's align it vertically so that we can sort of visualize it a little bit better. So if we wanted to print out the value that's attached to the key class, we would use this particular syntax, where we would look at the name of the dictionary, we would use the square brackets, and inside the square brackets we would give the key, which is the string class, and this would return a value, in this case CS, which would then be printed out. There are different values or types that we could put in the value. So we don't just have to stick with strings, even though we can use strings, but we can also use lists as a value. We could use other dictionaries as a value. We could use integers as a value. And if we wanted to look a little bit more about how this would work, let's look at how a dictionary which holds other dictionaries would work. So we would use this particular syntax, and again, we can write it horizontally as we would on the IDE or interpreter, and we would end up with it's a little bit confusing if we look at it this way. So instead, let's look at it vertically again. And we have a few different sections here. First, we have the outer layer, which is the overall dictionary, and we're going to look at that as a red dictionary with key value pairs inside. And then we have this red dictionary's first key, which is classes, and it's a string, and we can visualize this, which is attached to another dictionary with the curly braces, and in this case it's going to be a green dictionary, which also has key values. Inside of this second inner dictionary, we have key, which is morning, and a value, which is CS. And then we have another key, which is noon, and another value, which is biology. So we end up with a structure similar to this one. Let's say that we wanted to access values from this dictionary of dictionaries. We will look at one key, so we would give it the first key that we're looking for. In this case, we want the dictionary of classes, and this would go through, look for this classes key, and it would return this new dictionary, which is the green one. And from that dictionary, we can give it another key, in which case we can give it the key morning, or the string morning, and that would go through and look through the inner dictionary and find the key, and it would return the value that we wanted, and then we can do whatever we want with it. We could print it, we could store it in another value, and so on. Now, let's look at how we could use dictionaries to be able to count different words from a list. So again, we have this list, and in this list we have strings, and we want to go through all of the strings in this list, and we want to count how many times each string appears in this list. Now, this would be a great use of a dictionary. Okay, so let's look at this for loop, and in this for loop, we're first going to look up the list by name, in which case we have a list called words list. Great. Then we are going to look at the current word, and the for loop is going to go through the word list, and each time that it iterates through it, it's going to look at a value inside of the word list, and it's going to create a variable called current word that holds that value. So the first time that it goes around, current word is going to be assigned the value of the string u. Once we have the current word's value, we can then have an if-else statement that checks for whether the current word is inside of the dictionary for counting. In this case, we start out, there's nothing in it. It's empty. So we notice that the current word, string u, is not in there. So then we can move on to the inside of this if statement, and we can set the value of the string u, which is the current word, to the integer 1. Now, to be able to set values inside of the dictionary, we use the syntax that we see up here. On the left side of the equal sign, we're going to give it the name of the dictionary that we're looking at. Inside of square brackets, we're going to give the value of the key, and then on the right side of the equal sign, we're going to give the value that we want to attach to that key. And we are done with that iteration of the for loop. And again, we look at our word list again. We look for the current word inside of this list. Because we've already done index 0, we're now going to move on to index 1. And in this case, it's going to be the string no. We're going to create our check again. We're going to say, in the dictionary for counting, the current word, which happens to be the string no, is it in it? And it's not. So then we assign the value of 1 to the string no. And we have counted these words. We found one, or u one time, and we found no one time. Now let's go to the next iteration. Again, look at the list. We look at the current word. In this case is going to be the third word, which happens to be u. and we go, is the current word is in the dictionary for counting. Let's look inside the dictionary for counting, and we notice that the current word, string U, is already in it. So then we go to the else part of this if statement. And in the else part, we are going to say, for the dictionary of counting, update the current word, update the key, which string value U, and we're going to add an equal to 1. So we're going to add 1 to the current value, in which case we are going to end up with 2. So if we continue iterating through this list, every time that we encounter a word that's already in our dictionary, we're going to add 1 to it. And if we've never seen that word before, then we're just going to give it a value of 1 because it's the first time that we've seen it. Okay, now we can have some time for you guys to ask some questions, and if there's any thing that you didn't quite get or you'd like me to repeat, we can go ahead and look at that.